Welcome. My name is Benjamin Warner. I go by Ben, and I'm NCA's Research Council Chair, Professor and Associate Chair, Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of Communication at the University of Missouri. I am thrilled to welcome you to today's virtual learning opportunity titled Research Cultivation Grant Stories and Advice for First-Time Grant Recipients. VLOs are exclusive member-only sessions designed to foster connection, learning, and growth within the NCA community. Through interactive discussions and expert-led presentations, this series provides a space for members to engage with cutting-edge research, explore best practices, and collaborate on pressing issues in the field of communication. By enhancing access, engagement, and a sense of ownership within the association, VLOs create conditions that empower members in their professional and scholarly pursuits as part of NCA's broader mission to embrace and enact inclusion, equity, and access. VLOs also serve as a platform for advocating and advancing these principles in communication scholarship, teaching, and professional practice. It's our hope that VLOs are a vital resource for NCA members dedicated to lifelong learning and professional development. More information about this year's VLO series can be found on our website at natcom.org. Today's VLO will feature a roundtable interview in which past recipients of NCA's Research Cultivation Grant share their experiences. Panelists will talk about their projects, discuss the role of the grant in their research and careers, and provide some advice for future applicants and how to best position your work for the award. I will also plug that the Research Cultivation Grant call is out on NCA's website, and we will be reviewing applicants in the next few months to award the next series of awards. I'll also mention that this year there is a special LIFT grant that people can apply to that does not require you to be a first-time grant recipient, that you can also look for information about that coming from NCA. Now, I want to begin with our land acknowledgement. NCA would like to acknowledge that the land the national office in Washington, D.C. resides on is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people. NCA acknowledges that it is often gathered upon unceded lands and that those gatherings manifested the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the grave harm that colonialism brought these lands, in particular, the erasure of both indigenous and African identities via slavery and via racist laws that segregated all people into binary classifications of white and black. This acknowledgement demonstrates our commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Thank you. Now, our speakers today, we have an excellent lineup who will share their cultivation grant funded research and experiences with us. We have Angela Gist-Mackey from the University of Kansas, who will be talking about her project, Communication as Currency, Longitudinal Mixed Methods Study of a Nonprofit Financial Literacy Program for Low-Income Families. We have Fawad Shah from Auburn University, using a culture-centered approach to reduce vaccine hesitancy among marginalized Pakhtun community in Pakistan. We have Charee Thompson from the University of Illinois, developing and testing communication skills training program to improve pediatricians' conversations about medical uncertainty. And we have Andre Johnson from the University of Memphis talking about his Project Now book, Black Lives Matter, Perspectives from the Ground. I'll be moderating and I'll be helping field questions at the end. So please feel free to drop any questions in the chat that come to mind during the presentations, or feel free to save them for the end and use Zoom's raise hand feature when prompted. But let's get started. First, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. And I'm going to start by asking everybody, and let's go in the order of Angela, Fawad, Charee, and Andre, to talk about your research, about the project that you did with the cultivation grant.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Angela Gist-Mackey. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm so excited to be with you and share about our work today. So this was a 4-year community engaged mixed methods longitudinal research project. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my collaborator, Dr. Alicia Bodzidlo. She and I have a forthcoming book project from this work that's tentatively titled Struggles Towards Stability, Communication, Class, and Relationships in the Fight Against Financial Insecurity. And that is coming hopefully to a university press near you, so we'll keep you posted. So we had a team of grad students, including Dr. Greta Underhill, Saripa Sanyal, Dr. Shelley Hepler, Michelle Wilson, and Dr. Julian Sperling, some of who graduated, as you can hear. And we explored the process of obtaining financial literacy by using sort of community engaged methods. So we conducted a series of pre and post interviews and pre and post surveys with families who participated in the program. And then we also interviewed staff and volunteers and conducted observational field work as well. So in this book, our argument is that we often view money matters and personal finance as either transactional, behavioral, or psychological, but at their core, money matters are also inherently relational. And so we look at relationships at the micro, meso, and macro levels to examine class dynamics and power as people are engaging against what I would argue is economic oppression in this country. So I'm excited to share more or talk offline about the work. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fawad Shah. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Communication and Journalism at Auburn University. And my project was basically a qualitative project. I did interviews and observation and fieldwork in Pakistan, in the border areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan, with the aim of exploring how people living in those areas conceptualized health and how did their conceptualization of health and well-being impacted the way they approached vaccination, especially polio vaccination and maternal health in those areas. And I'll be happy to share more about it later.
Good morning, everyone. Charee Thompson, professor at the University of Illinois. I first want to acknowledge that Anna Kerr, who is at Ohio University, was really sort of lead on this project. And I'm just grateful to have worked with her. And I would say this project is probably the last 5-ish years of really a 10-year relationship doing research, trying to help medical professionals, really physicians in training, including residents and medical students, improve their communication skills in talking about uncertainty with their patients, which is kind of antithetical to the nature of medicine, right? Which is really training for certainty, excuse me. And so our goal was to create an online training through a program called Articulate, which is through, or Storyline, I'm sorry, which is through the Articulate suite of like e-learning. And I would love to chat more about that. So we created this theoretically grounded, evidence-based training that we implemented at Nationwide Children's Hospital with their pediatric residency program. And I'll talk more about the results, but that was the core of the project itself. Thanks.
And good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, or greetings, wherever we are. My name is Andre. I'm Andre Johnson. I'm a professor at the University of Memphis in the Department of Communication and Film, studying at the intersection of rhetoric, race, and religion. My collaborator and partner, Dr. Amanda Neal Egger, a shout out to her. And this is this was part of an ongoing project, a building on, if you will, from the first research that produced the book, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And here it is, the summer of 2020. We were all at home on Zoom and still trying to write, still trying to figure it out. We had already decided early on that we needed to do a second book, and especially when the pandemic hit. So what do you do when the pandemic hit, when you can't interview folk in person? Well, let's go to Zoom. And also, what Zoom afforded us to do is to broadened our horizons a bit. The first book, we looked at activists in the BLM movement and people that would subscribe to ALM on a more local level. And what we were now receiving were interviews from people around the country, people that we have seen, that we were watching on television during the summer of 2020, people who were actively involved in many of the uprisings and protests that happened in the summer of 2020. And we were just grateful and thankful for the grant, because it enabled us to not only interview people, but to bring in grad students. I can talk about that a little bit later, and to really flesh out what it is that our research, what we wanted to try to do. And of course, in the end, as you can see in my backdrop, produce a book. So we were excited, took full advantage of this research cultivation grant, and dare I say that many of the things that we did put in the book and did find out in our research probably would not have been there had we not received the grant. So thank you, NCA, and thank you all of the people who decided that we were worthy enough to receive the grant to do work.
Excellent, thank you. And now I've been a member of Research Council for, this is my 4th year, and I didn't know anything about the Research Cultivation Grant prior to joining on with the Research Council. So I would love to hear about your experience applying for the Cultivation Grant. The Cultivation Grant is designed for first-time grant recipients, and so how you approached putting the proposal together, what your kind of process was, and then what the experience was like going through, having received the grant, and how it maybe contributed to your developing your research and forwarding your career. And Angela, would you like to get us started again?
Sure, thanks so much. So this grant was just really a great fit for our project. We naturally aligned with some of the main criteria. And so the general criteria, and I'm not sure if this has evolved, so correct me, it has, at the time we applied, was innovation, internationalization, and engaged scholarship. So the project was already underway by the time we saw the grant call for proposals. And I thought, and we needed some funds to keep advancing the project. So similar to what Dr. Johnson just talked about, our project started in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and then that pivoted the entire medium of this program. So they moved from being in person, teaching financial literacy, to doing it all online. And so that extended our data collection considerably, because we kind of needed to start over to see what does financial literacy also look like in this virtual space. And so it came in a clutch when we were like, oh, this data collection is going to be twice as long as we initially anticipated. We had argued that our project fit the need of innovation because it was longitudinal and mixed methods, and the combination of those is sometimes rare. It takes a lot of resources to pull off a project like that, and so the grant helped to facilitate that. In terms of internationalization, we were able to define that around looking at the intersection of communication, class, racial and ethnic, and generational aspects of identity. And these marginalized families that were struggling for financial literacy. And so we really looked at that through a cultural lens, sort of thinking of class as a cultural space. And then it was already an engaged project. So we had a nonprofit partner who we were already conducting the research with. For us, this grant was an excellent way to show our added commitment to the project. So the nonprofit partner had already paid for participants to either take surveys or participate in interviews. But it was our way to also show sort of an equal investment in the research project as a collaboration, for us to say we've got some, added commitment economically into this process as well. And so the grant helped us pay for compensating the graduate students who participated in the data collection and analysis process. It helped us to pay for licenses of in vivo qualitative analysis software and training on that software. So that was great to have formal training from At the time, it was QSR International. Now Lumivero owns In Vivo. But they had great workshops that they took our graduate students and faculty through. And we also paid for some transcription as well. So it was just very helpful in facilitating moving the project forward. So hopefully that answers your question, Ben. I'll turn it over to someone else.
So my project was, so I was in the process of designing the project. I had the idea, I had things written down, what I wanted to do, the areas I wanted to explore. I had already established partnerships in Pakistan with community members, with schools, but I did not have enough funding to just implement the project. At that time, I was working at a teaching school, and I did not just had enough funds to go out and implement the project. So the project really helped. The funding, the cultivation grant really helped me uh, in the implementation of the project in terms of resources and then access to the communities. And it really just aligned well with the overall goals of the project. I wanted my project to be really a community-based project where I just don't do interviews via phone or Zoom, even though that was a possibility. But I wanted to go out, spend time with the communities, and then come up with solutions, strategies, and implementations together as a team, rather than me doing interviews, then do analysis and recommending implementations or strategies for um, improving communication between the communities and different organizations working in those areas. So I wanted to work closely with those communities and get out to the field and do a real community-based project. So it was really helpful for me. Most of the grants, I used it for travel and then for purchase of in vivo software for data analysis.
Hello again. Since I'm going third, I was thinking through some of the common themes, and so I will couch my response to continue what my colleagues have said. Um, for us, like many projects, you either need this funding to sort of get a project off the ground, often to keep it going, or as a stepping stone towards expansion in some way, which may or may not include more funding, right? So we call these seed funding or whatever. And for us, it was not so much to get the project off the ground, but to keep it going and to help facilitate the cost of some very real material things that we typically don't um, have the funds for. So for us, the subscription for the software platform for a couple of years, I think was like $2,500. It's not cheap. Software's not cheap. We all know this. Um, it also helped us pay for participant um, compensation as well as a graduate student and also conference travel. So that was how we used our funds. Also, what I heard my colleagues saying, and it was true for us too, was that you need to have, and what's helpful is to have existing relationships with collaborative partners, right? And deep connections that don't read as so transactional, right? Like these are long-standing where your collaborators are partners. They're not just access. At least that was true for us. Where the pediatric resident directors, they helped us craft the manuscripts. They helped us write the grant. They also are really deeply invested in uh, uncertainty in medicine. And then also in our application, we attempted to really make a tight connection between the goals of our project and that of NCA. And at the time, we had put in our application, quote, the application of competent communication to improve the quality of human life and relationships and the use of knowledge about communication to solve human problems. And so that for us is like the consequences of not attending to uncertainty and managing that in compassionate, creative ways in care, particularly pediatric care. Thanks.
And yes, being like you, I hadn't heard of this particular grant, and I think it was Amanda actually that brought it to my attention. And we began to start working around it because we thought our project fit all of the parameters. But can I just add, working with NCA and the people who were assisting us with this was a smooth process. And I was grateful, and we were grateful for that, because at the same time, as you know, and I'm sure the other researchers can attest to this, you have to work with your own institutions as well, especially with IRB and all of that. So, and that can get kind of tricky. So to have on one side, hey, here we have a couple of questions here, and to get right back with us so we can just plug them in for that, for our institution, was very, very helpful as well. And then the follow-up, I think, after we received the award, I think that at the following NCA, we came together to talk about it in a panel, which is what we really want to do. Part of the research was for us to go out and to share our findings, that we put that in it. And I think that was a strong piece of the proposal that if anybody follows me on social media, you know I'm gonna shout you out. So we believe in the shout outs, and we want folk to know the good research and the good things that we are doing here in COM, especially in times such as these. But I digress. But anyway, what we want to try to do is we wanted to try to make sure that people knew about it, and to also shout out NCA and the Research Cultivation Grant as well too, and encourage people to please apply and submit, and to submit your work in order to do the work that you feel that you need to do. So that's what I want to say about that. I think the process was smooth. I think the process was, the follow-up was great. I went back over and just looked at some of the emails, and it was right, you know, just quick responses, and we were grateful for that.
Excellent, excellent. That's wonderful. Well, the next question that I have prepared is, I'd love to hear about the challenges that you may have encountered implementing your project, the lessons that you learned, tips that you might have for people, maybe if they receive this, or if they're planning research, things that you had to troubleshoot, and now because you figured out a solution, maybe somebody else isn't going to have to. And you know, basically any advice you have for people who may be in a situation similar to you in the future, in terms of actually implementing your proposal.
So I'll kick us off. So one of the biggest challenges we had was around sort of bureaucratic challenges and specifics in our institution. So we received the grant award, and one of our grad students who was on the project is also a full-time staff member at our institution. And that apparently was a challenge in terms of paying the compensation to that particular student. And the Office of Research was telling us, this person can't also be a staff member and a student. But I was like, but they are. And they've been working on this project for a year. And so they kept telling us to just find another grad student. It was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So it was important to the students' academic training to stay on the project and continue on. So NCA was simply wonderful in helping us to figure out how to work around that, and in a way that both our IRB and institution and HR was all happy with. So I would say part of what you can do is to definitely just be in communication with your grantor about whatever internal challenges, policies that you're trying to navigate, because there was an easy fix, but I was feeling frustrated trying to force that fix within my institution when really NCA was the answer to that. And so just to be more collaborative, I think, when you hit those challenges. Another challenge that we found was that the Office of Research, who was facilitating sort of the grant spending, if you will, was, tracking and auditing our spending around the grant. And their reports back to us on how we were spending down the funds were delayed, like there was a lag between them. So we ended up overspending, which was fine. Our department covered the extra cost, but that was something that I didn't anticipate, that I wasn't getting timely reports. So the lag was about 3 weeks. So by the time I stopped spending as soon as I realized we were close, but because there was a 3 week lag, there had been 3 weeks of spending that wasn't accounted for. And so that was a lesson learned in terms of maybe I needed to be keeping my own internal audits instead of sort of trusting the records that I was receiving. At the end of your project, you do have to report back to NCA sort of your activities. And so we had to we did a final report talking about where the project was, how that was advanced. And so just be prepared to, have detailed notes as you're executing your project so that that report is easier to put together at the end. That's a little bit of the insight that we learned as we were navigating the situation within our institution at NCA. But I appreciate the way NCA helped us to navigate those challenges and facilitate our projects successfully.
So for us, it was the first part of the process was really smooth. I applied for the project, got the grants, the funds were transferred, but then my institute did not know how to deal with the international part of the project. So there was no mechanism in place to facilitate international travel for faculty, compensation, how to compensate the participants, different partners. So there was no mechanism in place. And they realized that after I got the grant, the funds were transferred. And then at that point, they started putting a system in place and they delayed the process. And unfortunately, at that point, NCA's there was a transition in the staff at the NCA office as well. So the person who was handling the grant had left or were about to leave, and were on they were on leave, and the next one had not joined. So it was a little difficult communicating between the organizations from my school to NCA. But other than that, the process was really smooth. And I also tried to keep notes. So because we were required to have a mid report and then a final report at the end. So I just wanted to make sure that I kept everything organized, took notes, and then prepared the report. I had a draft ready, so I would just add to that draft. And then at the end, when it was time to submit the report, I was ready. But mostly for me, I would say it was my institution not having the experience of dealing with grants that required international collaboration or research was a big challenge to navigate for me.
Thank you. I have some things that are different but similar. So hopefully folks in the audience feel like you're getting a wide range of potential challenges. I would say that ours kind of have to do less about structural things with our institutions, because we're working across institutions at the time and continue to do so, and more about us as researchers and the nature of the project. So um, my advice, I'm framing this as advice. My challenge is to learn to be okay focusing on the problem itself and stating the impact of your work. So for myself, I come from a very sort of theoretically driven training. And so I was not necessarily trained to write grants or had worked on grants myself. And so that comes with, writing grants is a different genre of writing. And I wish I would have understood that better a little earlier. Um, and so part of that is like, how do you take the thing that you're interested in and talk about the potential impact of your work? Because typically we're trained to like be a little more conservative about our interpretations of our reach of our work and not overstate its implications. But when you apply for grants, you kind of have to be bold and confident, which was difficult for me. I can't speak for Anna, but for myself. Connected to that for us was making convincing arguments that managing uncertainty is important. I mean, if you are in, my kind of area of the research world, you probably buy that managing uncertainty is important, but medicine devalues this because it's perceived as communication of a non-answer, right? Like a nothing that contradicts expectations of diagnostic closure, et cetera. So we learn to sort of reframe it or hook it onto other important processes like shared decision making, compassionate care, ethics, things like that. Um, I'll conclude by saying, I think, and echoing what other folks said about starting really early. I am always surprised now that I apply for more funding, just how long it takes to apply for funding because you have so many moving parts. You have no control over like how quickly your grants folks will respond, how long it takes to move all these things around, especially as the pockets of money you apply for get larger and they involve more institutions. So start early. Get to know your grants folks and their norms. Like, what is it like working with them? Not just time things, but just the relationships, the things that they like or don't like. And then also, towards my point earlier about not having a lot of experience applying for grants, seek opportunities at your institution or through professional organizations like NCA to learn how to write grants if that's not something in your toolbox because you'll hear different things that hopefully are redundant in good ways that help you like really reinforce the things you need to do, like have strong relationships if that's part of your work, make the project feasible, show impact, and things like that.
All right. Problems. Let's see. Lessons, challenges, lessons learned. Of course, Ben, no problems. It was so smooth all the way through. Let's move. No, I'm just teasing. Actually, here's what I learned in this particular process. Um, First of all, have an awesome partner working with you, a co-writer, and Dr. Amanda Neal Edgar is just totally awesome. And she navigated much of the R&B and the funding for us there and getting all of that done. And then here's something that I don't think gets discussed enough, maybe, and maybe it's different at our different institutions. But your administrator in your department is just it's going to be the key because we have a great one, Commissioner Smith, and she is the one, was the one that navigated when we did receive the money. Where did it go? What account? How do we access that money? What do we have to do? And how do we get it? Can we get it before we go on the trip? Or is this a reimbursement? All of those type of things that we got. And then since we were also bringing in graduate students, how do we pay them? Do we pay them directly? Is this part of their stipend? Is this part of their TA-ship? I mean, all of those kind of questions that we kind of laid at her and the department's doorstep, and they helped us each and every step of the way, navigate each and every step of the way. Now, in our department, in our college, the College of Communication and Fine Arts, we have people at all the levels now. And there's a big push for us to go out and get grants, discover grants, apply for grants, all of those type of things. So we have much of the mechanisms in place to do this now. But in the beginning, or at least when we were doing this back in late 1920, the pieces were not there, but we all came together, and Dr. Amanda Neal Edgar and Commissioner Smith and our chair, Wendy Atkins Sayre, all in the department really just worked together to make sure that everything went as smoothly as possible. So in the end, we were grateful and thankful for all of this. So that's what I would say. Make sure that your team in your department, make sure your team, the administrator of the department, the person that handles the budget and the business of the department really understands what it is that you're doing and what are you trying to do. I use this word, casting out your vision and your mission about this project, and allow them to work, or in the parlance of homegirl Glorilla, allow them to cook.
That's excellent. That's all fantastic advice. And I really want to emphasize a couple of things. One thing that, Andre said, it all goes perfectly. There's never a problem. And so that's probably the number one takeaway. But to echo, something that everybody else has said, I've seen so many of these projects where the institution is really the middle entity between NCA or whoever the funder is and you, and there often is friction or some kind of hurdles associated with the fact that your institution is in between you and the research funds, and being in regular communication with the funder helps so much, because if the institution says we can't compensate your participants or you can't have this person on your proposal, and the funder says yes, and the funder is where the money comes from, the institution is like, well, we do want the money. So I think I really wanted to reinforce that point, and that being in regular communication with the NCA contacts can help navigate a lot of these things. The last prepared question before we get into questions from the chat and giving you all an opportunity to raise your hands and ask questions is that I say, I'm going to ask one more question too, but it'll be a brief one maybe. But what advice do you have for future applicants? Obviously, all 4 of these proposals were outstanding proposals, not only, because they were selected and won, but here, we've gone through all the winners and elevated the 4 of your proposals as exemplars that we want to showcase even more. So what was your approach, and how would you tell somebody about how they might increase their chances of developing a compelling proposal?
So my biggest piece of advice is to find friendly reviewers. So to get your trusted colleagues to read the application in advance, make sure that what you're communicating is really coming through, and to tell your story. I mean, this research funds really socially relevant and meaningful scholarship. And I felt compelled on behalf of my participants, the families that we had been working with, to really argue for why this project was important. And so in your writing, you want that to come through, and you need that narrative of the relevance and meaningfulness of your work to just shine in the grant applications. And that doesn't always happen on the first draft. So you want to make sure that you've got feedback to make it as strong as you can. Because you're working on behalf of oftentimes like marginalized communities. So their stories deserve to be told. And so that's sort of, I guess, my biggest piece of advice. I also appreciated the opportunity to just use this to show and teach our graduate students on this is what the grant process looks like and feels like from beginning to end. And so that was very useful, I think, for their training, and something that helped to further their education as part of their master's and PhD training at the time. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I would say it's just focusing on storytelling. So your proposal should tell the story of your project, what makes it important, and how it aligns with the goals of the grant that you're writing for. So initially, when I wrote my first draft, it was really literature heavy, and it looked like more like a literature review than a story that would impress. So the first advice I got was to focus on the story rather than the literature. So, and the impact that your proposal will have. So focusing on the project, the impact it will have on the field, on the communities, and how it aligns with the goals of NCA and of the Research Cultivation Grant. I also reached out to several colleagues who had experience writing grants, applying for grants, and then kept revising my proposal based on the feedback that I received. So I would say it's important to have a network of friends, colleagues around you who can provide you feedback on your project and help you refine the project before you apply. Also, having Just like my colleagues mentioned earlier, having a strong connection and understanding of the grant procedures at your institution helps to understand the policies, what you can, what's the direct and indirect cost situation, what can the school help you with, what resources are already available. So having an understanding of that also helps.
Awesome. The only thing I would add based on what I've already said and my colleagues have said is I think I've always underestimated too, not only how long it takes and how many moving parts, um, but also the persistence it takes to do the funding thing. It is just a different ball game. Um, and I would recommend to everyone that you also seek other funding. Because your project, you don't typically like develop a project for a funding opportunity. You have a project and you need it funded. So there could be other funding mechanisms. So, I mean, I wouldn't want for you to spend your entire summer crafting this application and you don't get it because it's highly competitive. And then this thing you labored over an entire summer isn't useful to you otherwise. So, what else does your university offer in terms of little pockets of money that you can use if this doesn't work out? Um, Often you don't get funding on the first try. I think that's just like publishing, right? So be persistent, ask for feedback, and be ready with next steps.
And I will echo those sentiments that have gone before, and also add one of the things I like to do is I like to actually read the grant proposal and follow what the grantee or grantor rather is asking for. And I put it in the proposal. This is what you're looking for. This is how this proposal will address what you're looking for, or what you say you're looking for. Also, storytelling and the narratives are definitely important. Also, I think one of the things that that we liked about our grant proposal is that we were talking the summer, well, the book came out summer of 2020. We were interviewing Black Lives Matter activists and adherents, protesters. So we thought that we needed to give just a brief understanding of what BLM was all about, especially as it relates to communication studies. And we put that in there as well too, and told some narratives and stories around that. So yeah, all try to be specific to the what the grant is asking for, but also try to incorporate some stories around that as well too. I think that has all helped.
Excellent. Well, we are moving into the Q&A portion of this. We have plenty of time for discussion, about not quite 45 minutes. I want to first echo what everybody said about being a storyteller and getting other people's feedback, because we understand our research and we understand what it means to us. And it's oftentimes so hard to figure out what needs to be translated, what needs to be explained. But I'll say, from the reviewer's point of view, some proposals just jump out of the pack because you're thinking about it as I'm spending the money of NCA members, and I want to be able to explain to the people who are paying their dues and their conference registration fees what they're getting out of it. And the ones that come, the proposals that rise to the top, it's so easy to say, you know, what we're getting out of it. Like, you know, we're trying to get rid of polio in the border region between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Like, it's, you know, that's amazing, right? And so having that story and understanding the value that you're putting into the world and the people that you're helping, or the benefits of this, we see that, and it helps so much. Now, we're entering Q&A, but I did foreshadow that I was going to hog the Q&A a little bit by asking the first question, or maybe my last prompt. You can decide which one it is. But I would love to hear an update on your projects. The first question I did get in the chat was about your process for publishing a book. But maybe before we even get into how do you go about getting a book with your proposal, I would just like to hear, what's the status of this research and what is the kind of big picture finding that you walked out of your research with?
So for our project, it started it with the idea that a book would come from it. So I've been doing community engaged research for a number of years. And this was the first project where the nonprofit partner reached out to me and asked, I've got this program and I know you study poverty, but I have no idea if this program is actually helping people. Would you vet it? Like, could you use research to tell us what we're doing well, what we're doing poorly, how we can improve? And I thought, sure, that's a thing research can do for you. So when we designed the project, it was really just meeting that community need. And over time, it became clear that the medium of a journal article would not do justice to what all we had found in that process. And so it felt like it would be better to honor it in the longer narrative form of a book. And I initially pitched the idea of a book to my colleague, Dr. Fazilo, and she was like, no, I don't have the capacity to write a book. And I was like, okay, I'll come back. So I came back in about 6 months and was like, let me pitch this to you again, because I really believe that this is the right fit for what all we have to say. And by that time, she said, okay, I see your point. So we embarked upon this endeavor, and this is the first book manuscript I've ever worked to written. So I'm excited. It's gone through the peer review process. That went very well. And so our editor is taking the peer reviews, our full manuscript, and our response letter to a board, and they're going to vote like literally in next week or 2 weeks from now about whether to offer us a contract. So I'll keep you posted. I did share the progress or the proposal with NCA. So Dr. Warner had asked us, and so that full proposal should be available to you through NCA under the membership platform. Our findings, we really identified 5 multifaceted struggles towards stability that these families are engaging in as they are working on financial literacy. And we develop a theoretical model of what all is happening at sort of a meta level in this program. And so I won't give you all of it, but some of the key things that I think are key contributions are the way that communication was used to destigmatize poverty throughout this program, creating a safe space for people to really admit what they don't understand about finances and the financial decisions they have been making. Another thing is that they began to unlearn counterproductive financial habits and relearn new habits, which engages in sense making, sense breaking, and sense giving sort of processes from a communication standpoint. And this is a long-term program, so the program lasts about a year. So it's not sort of a short one and done financial literacy program. They really are in relationship with these families for an extended period of time. And people can stay in the program and do another round if they feel like they need to. And so those were some of the key things that I think were differentiators that helped us to better understand sort of class struggles. We also explored some class dynamics because the staff and volunteers come from more affluent backgrounds. And so there was sort of cross-class communication happening. And there were many class-based microaggressions that emerged in our fieldwork. So we were able to give some of that feedback to the nonprofit as well to talk about here's how you're inadvertently offending the very families you're trying to serve. And this can further disenfranchise them, unmotivate them to participate in the program. And so they were very open to that feedback. We also critiqued them in terms of racial diversity. At the time we were collecting data, all of the staff and volunteers identified racially as white, and the families were very multicultural from a variety of different races and ethnicities. And so speaking across that racial divide was also very problematic, and we gave them that feedback, and they have since work to diversify their staff as well. So there was some real, both I would say, theoretical insights and practical implications that have come from that program, and they've since expanded the program. It was serving 1 county when we first started, and now it's serving 5 different counties across this metro area. And so it's been great that we were able to positively influence that program and make it more sort of equitable as they have implemented it. So thanks so much for asking that question, Dr.
So for me, when I started the project, it was just like I didn't have any idea of where it was going or how many uh, papers will I get out of the project. But my goal was to have something that I can give back to the community and then share my results with the broader academic community as well. So after the data collection and initial results, I went back to the communities, shared my findings with them, and we had like a collective uh, kind of group experiences with the communities, people living in the villages there. After that, I had a couple of presentations at the schools and universities where the members of the communities were invited and then shared my findings there with those communities. And then I started writing manuscript. So I had like a conference presentation and then a paper is under review. But the more I dig deeper into the data is so rich that now the goal is to convert that into a book. And I'm already in contact with a couple of publishers. And I remember a couple of people asking question at the beginning of the chat on how to reach out to the publishers about that. So personally, I've had experience of editing books now. So I know a couple of publishing representative. I look at the publishers who are publishing work that's kind of aligns with the goals of my project, and I feel like my project would be a good fit for that publisher. So I identified a couple, and now I'm in contact with them for a book. So initially, when I started the project, the goal was to write a couple of white papers and then share the results in conferences and as a research paper. But now, based on the data that I have, I am planning to convert it into a book, and I feel like it won't be uh, like the data deserves to be in a longer format to be published as a book. In terms of finding, my key finding was that people have different perceptions of health and well-being in those communities. And when they received messages from the World Health Organization and UNICEF, they were basically uh, they didn't. So people's perceptions of the health and well-being and what polio meant to them and what health and well-being meant for them in their culture and then the maternal well-being, it just did not align with the goals and objectives of WHO, UNICEF. They followed kind of a hierarchical model. So in the UNICEF and WHO and the government of Pakistan defined campaigns for them. They didn't align with the cultural values and goals. And that's why people were not receptive of the messages they received. So they perceived them negatively. And just like, so that's why the campaigns run by the government and international organizations were not successful. And in the papers and in the book manuscript, I describe like the reasons why and how did like my collaboration with these partners grow and the things that they recommended to bridge the gap between the government, the communities, and the international organization.
Thanks so much. Let's see. So when it comes to our specific project for this funding mechanism, the training itself, we embedded within a larger training. So we had residents do the online training, so it's more self-directed. And then during the pandemic, we had the residency program come together in a Zoom room and have discussions facilitated by their attendings, which I think was really powerful to have the attendings. They're also talking about their challenges with uncertainty. And then we had residents practice with standardized patients. And so it was sort of folded into this larger curriculum. It took 2 years to collect data, and we've presented it at the International Conference on Communication and Healthcare. That was in Spain last year, I believe. And then we are working on publishing that. What we found is that through the training, residents reported that their attitudes towards and their intentions to communicate uncertainty with patients and families increased significantly. And we had 50 residents in the sample who did the training. What was interesting and now shapes where we're going with this is that their communication efficacy with attendings did not increase like we had hoped. And we think that that's one, it might be because the training was more focused on talking with patients. It could also be, given their sort of qualitative feedback, that it's difficult when it's your boss or someone who has control over your professional career to feel like you can go to them and say, like, I don't know what's going on with this patient. So that is, I think the hallmark of a great project is it's generative, as my colleagues have said. So they were like, wait a second, attendings also need said training. So we have adapted the training and for attendings and faculty and senior physicians. And then we also thought, wow, this really needs to start earlier than when they have their MD or their DO. So we also have adapted for medical students and obtained funding through the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine. This is why medicine has a lot of acronyms. Otherwise, it would just be a lot. So AACOM. And so we've sought and obtained some other pockets of money to help expand it. That's for that project. I'm grateful to Anna because through this project, for myself, it's really ignited a spark for me to do more communication skills training. And so for myself, I've used the same platform to create trainings for like everyday people in their interpersonal relationships, giving support. I've also used this platform and combined it with VR in our medical school to teach medical students about how to ask about social and structural determinants of health, and about implicit bias and things like that. So I think it's both expanded the project within itself in terms of audience and stakeholders and funding, and then also for me personally as a scholar in the ways that I try to improve the support and care that people living with illness receive.
And yes, well, after we did the research and started going around, we immediately going around presenting some of it, we immediately put together a book proposal. And as you can see, the book, The Summer of 2020, George Floyd and the Resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement is a direct project from the research award. Again, that's one of the reasons why we were so grateful. And we hope that we can continue on and this book can get out and continue on, so we can also add, Dr. Warner, that if we somehow are graced enough to have an award or two, we can say the award-winning book produced by the Research Cultivation Grant. So, and believe me, we would share that as well too. But actually, there may be a follow-up even to this book. We're thinking about, from the summer of 2020 until like today, maybe going back and, if we can, talking to some of those activists that we talked to earlier, or even new folk, and just to get their feelings about what has happened after the summer of 2020. And how do we find ourselves in this place? So there may be another, I don't know, application coming from from the University of Memphis somewhere.
That's excellent. I would love to read that next book as well. Okay, so you all are welcome to start asking questions. We have a handful of questions in the chat. Let's see. Rosalie, if you have any follow-ups about setting up to write a book or identifying a publisher, feel free to follow up. Nori asked if NCA or the Research Council conducts grant writing workshops. I can answer that question myself. One thing I'll say is that this VLO is part of our effort to provide more, advice for would-be grant writers. NCA has had a resource page for grant writers that was, I think, very helpful, but I would also say a little bit outdated. And we're updating that as part of the website update. And so I hope there will be more resources associated with that. And the Research Council and the NCA leadership have been talking a lot about, a grant writing workshop and just more resources on how to do, effective grant writing, how to write well and prepare a good grant that is more, nuts and bolts. So I hope that answers that question. We did have a couple of questions that are just, how did you, are there things that you did to learn to write grant proposals? I know a lot of you talked about writing grants as being a different genre or style of writing. And so I would love to hear if there were workshops that you participated in, or if there's advice that you received, or if there are resources you consulted that were especially helpful to help answer Pallavi's questions.
So my institution hosts a number of grant writing workshops on a fairly regular basis. So I had attended some of those. I would also say I applied to lots of grants before the cultivation grant had been denied, and you usually get feedback through that. So that's also a way to learn. So you can, and if you don't get feedback, you can always ask for feedback, like what about this proposal, didn't merit being awarded, but they'll give you insights into either how you're framing or you're writing or whatever aspect about the project, maybe didn't align with the grant expectations. And so that feedback can be critical in enhancing your grant writing skills. Yeah.
I attended a couple of grant writing workshops during my PhD program, and then also when I was working as a faculty. So those workshops were really helpful. And then I reached out to my mentors and colleagues who had experienced writing grants, and that was also really helpful to get actual feedback, because attending workshops were helpful, but then writing the grant itself was like a little different. So it just like experiencing writing something was so getting feedback on the grant proposal was really helpful. I reached out to several people who had experienced writing grants and could provide feedback.
I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I know I've done a lot of grant writing workshops too. And on one hand, it is great to get that guidance. And then on the other hand, when you're writing your grant, it's like, okay, I need somebody more seasoned to help me answer or troubleshoot or just give me some feedback on some of this. And so I think it's wonderful to hear that from you all reinforced. Blessing asked about how you went about the IRB process, particularly when you're working across multiple institutions and or when you're working internationally. But in general, you're all working with communities, often communities that are vulnerable or where you want to be especially sensitive to conducting ethical research. And so what was the IRB process like? And for people that are trying to do similar research, do you have experiences you can share with them they can draw upon? Anyone can go first. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to pass the mic and let someone else, because we only work within our own home institution. So it was a little bit, I would imagine it would be a little bit better, a little smoother. I can, if I had to walk into someone's office and meet with them in person, if I had to, I could not even begin to imagine working collaboratively with multiple institutions. I have not done that yet. Multiple groups, of course, outside of the institution, but not institutions. So.
Dr. Shah, you go ahead. Your project seems most relevant to this question.
So I have had good experience with IRB at my institute. It was smooth sail, I would say, easier. The only hiccup was making the IRB folks understand that not all the countries have the IRB, and it's a very Western and US-centered concept. So initially, my school required uh, a letter from the host country, which is not like so many countries do not have IRBs, which is a little complicated. So then I had to explain things and how it's just like IRB is a different process. So just explaining things, and then they had to reach out to schools around us to see what their process was for situations like me, where we had to work in an international environment. So eventually we figured that out. But like initially, the reviewers asked for a letter from the host country, which was a little complicated. But then the school figured that out by reaching out to other schools, and I would say it was a regional teaching institute, so it was a bit complicated situation for them. They did not have a lot of experience managing like international grants and international research.
I'll just quickly add that the players involved with our project were the Children's Hospital and then Ohio University and then Illinois. And as I mentioned earlier, we didn't have any like structural barriers to both applying and also executing the project. So I'm really grateful for that. Now that's been reflected as not the case in many places. But IRB, I think our project also was pretty low risk in terms of, like when hospitals do IRBs, they're thinking like medical devices or certain treatments or whatnot. So like having the residents do a training, right, and was not risky, at least on the spectrum of risk. I will say it helped that one of the collaborators, it always helps to have champions, right, in your collaborations, always. Also had served on the IRB, so he knew what we needed to do to make it smoother, so that always really helps. But yeah, otherwise it was pretty smooth.
I can speak. So this project was all internal to our institution, but I've done other research projects in collaboration with scholars at other institutions. And you can have like an IRB. I forget, there's a technical name for it, but like basically a bridge agreement that one institution becomes sort of the main IRB. They vet everything, and then the second institution would see that approval and the research design and also sort of approve it internally so that everybody's bases are covered in terms of the ethics review.
That is excellent. I would say I've always here where I am, just like getting on the phone with somebody in the IRB office helps a lot, because then you can say, this is what I'm doing, and they can tell you what they're going to need to know or what's going to need to be explained. And I think there is a lot of variation from institution to institution about how closely things are scrutinized and what they're going to emphasize. And so I think hearing it from them helps so much. Do you all have any advice for using the grant to launch a project, particularly a community engaged project? I think, Angela, you mentioned that your project and your partnership was already ongoing. If you all are in the process of maybe starting a partnership or launching a project and see this grant as an opportunity to do that, what would your advice be?
So I actually think it's more compelling to a grantor to say this project won't be possible without your funds, without your support. To say like that you're providing critical and essential mechanism to getting this research off the ground. I do think it helps even if you haven't started the project, if you have a letter from a community partner that says we're committed to doing this work, and showing that you've already at least had a conversation with them about doing research, that is more compelling as opposed to never having approached them. But just make it clear to them that like, I don't think we can do this project if we don't get funds generally. So then, like we had brought this grant to our nonprofit partner to say, we're interested in applying for this. We think this could, further advance our research together. And they were like, great. We're glad that you're seeking out opportunities to apply for funding for this project. So I do think that is one way in which you can make an argument for why the funds are so critical in terms of getting the research off the ground. So hopefully that helps.
And I agree, I would echo that. it's important to have established partnerships, at least reaching out to the community members and organizations that you believe you can partner with for your research projects. In my experience, it's always helpful when people see that you have done the homework that you could do or the legwork that you could do without having the funds, and you have covered all the bases, and now you just need this funds or this grant to get the project started. So it's critical to reach out to the community members, speak to them if you can without uh, the grants, if you could, and then you can make a strong case for why your project should be funded because you have covered all the bases and you have advantage over other proposals or candidates who did not do that legwork. So it's important to reach out to community members, communities, organization, and establish these partnerships in the long run and get support from them, whether it's like support letters, uh, or just a consent of being willing to participate in the project, and then you can show that and make a story around it that you have done all the work and now you just need this grant to get things started.
As my colleagues were chatting, I was thinking about like this funding mechanism, its institutional origins, and then also just the amount, frankly. And so on the one hand, it's like you should have strong partnerships. And you're like, okay, how could those have existed for years with no money before that? Or where was that money coming from? And then also like making the case that this is your first time applying for funding together and you may not have publications with these folks or whatever. So I think at the end of the day, though, what's important is that you don't want people to review your grant and feel like everyone was just thrown together. If you've reviewed, like I keep saying in my comments and things like this, like, oh, it reminds me of a journal article, or it's not unlike publishing, or it's not this, if you reviewed panels for NCA or other things where there's collaborations, sometimes they feel thrown together where they're like, oh, it's these people and it doesn't make sense who's doing what or like why they're working together. And so when you craft something, you want to be clear about who's doing what, and your audience should be able to say like, oh, it's clear that Charee has a background in training and development, and Anna works within a medical school, and so that pairing really makes sense. Versus something that feels lopsided or some, you know what I mean? So you just want to make those connections, whether or not you have 8 publications together or you've never worked together or whatever.
Very good. I would like to take a moment to say that the deadline for the Research Cultivation Grant applications is September 1st, which is about 5 weeks from now. And 5 weeks is a beautiful amount of time to put together a proposal. And I would love to hear and see from so many of you who are participating and attending this event. And I'm putting the link to that in the chat. And so you can ask for, I think, $12,500 in funding to support a project. And we really are looking for projects that that engage often overlooked or marginalized communities. We're really looking for projects that maybe would, that aren't traditional candidates for grant funding. And now, we think like stuff that the NSF or the NIH might not immediately jump at. And it's like, well, that might be everything now. But think about areas of research that have been targeted, that have been censored, that have been clipped in, in recent months. And those are things that we're very motivated to support. And so we would love to see your research in the mix. I would also like to say, for anybody who is thinking, that sounds great, but I have received external funding already, maybe even from the Research Cultivation Grant. This year, the president of NCA, Janetta Sims, and the Research Council have partnered to create a LIFT grant, which anybody's eligible to apply for, and which is intended to support the type of scholarship that has been targeted, and support seems to be evaporating in the past few months. And so this is one of the mechanisms that NCA is trying to mobilize to fill gaps that are created and to support our members, especially our members who are in, who are finding institutions backing away from them all of a sudden. So keep the LIFT grant on your radar as well. Now, I would like to say, let's see. Yes.
Hey, Ben, can I jump in? Can I jump in
please.
right quick? I just need to shout out NCA for doing that. I am glad to be part of an organization that is responding to the times and trying to make way for scholarships still to be produced. So kudos to that, and shout out to you and Dr. Sims and Research Council and all the people who sat down and intentionally decided to say, hey, we want to still open up and create these spaces. You need to hear that verbally. So thank you for that. And then for people in the chat real quick, that's asking about books and book proposals and stuff like that, I did drop two links to some book series that might fit what it is that you're doing right now. You can reach out to me at any time if you want more information about them, but I think that will also help as well. So thank you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. A couple of questions in the chat that I may as well answer for everybody. Does the Research Council evaluate the grant proposals and decide the awards? Yes, that's one of the two big things that Research Council does. And, a lot of you may be thinking, I should serve on Research Council. I would be a great fit for Research Council. I may be thinking that looking at the brilliant stars we have on the Zoom call today. But one of the main things we do is we read these applications, and the Research Cultivation Grant is I think, one of the best mechanisms that NCA has to directly support and directly elevate the members. Now, how many grants are awarded each year? I would say typically 3 to 4. And sometimes we've been able to do 5. The NCA budget situation is, a fluid situation. And so some years we have more resources and some years we have less. I can also say that there are discussions about trying to get a parallel fund to research cultivation that is similar to the LIFT fund, but not a one-time thing, but maybe more permanent piece of NCA's grant award process. And so I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but I'm passionate and optimistic on that subject. I think we should all buy the summer of 2020 just to show how much we value the work, brilliance, and insight that Dr. Andre Johnson and Dr. Amanda Nell Edgar are bringing to the table. And I think we should pre-order Dr. Angela Gist-Mackey and Dr. Alicia Voltzillo's books as soon as they come out, and start emailing publishers about needing to see more work on efforts to alleviate polio in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I think I can't wait to read all of these books. Are there any more questions that I have neglected? I've been trying to follow the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. I've talked a lot. Love to hear your voices.
What's the timeline of this whole project completion, from selection of the awards to completion of the awards and all or the announcement of the recipients and all that?
Excellent question. I will try my hand at this, and then if any of you all that have received the award can correct me or say you misspoke, Ben, or if anybody who administers this at NCA wants to step in. But we review the applications in the fall, and I believe that we target the time around NCA for notification. I believe that this last year we had made decisions around NCA, but maybe we hadn't communicated awards until after. But basically, the end of the calendar year, sometime in there, is when we usually send notifications. And then the funding cycle is for the next calendar year. But there is, this is another one of those things where NCA will communicate the timetable, and people may say that's all well and good, but things have come up, and there needs to be some flexibility. And here I'm thinking of one of the recent projects that we funded was somebody who was planning to travel to Lebanon to interview Palestinian refugees living in the refugee camps on the border of Lebanon, and the research was to be taking place when war broke out. And so there's been a lot of creativity about how to pursue that project now. And NCA has been very good about working with this scholar to figure out how to make sure that the research can still happen and how to accommodate that. Did I accurately and successfully answer the question, or does anybody want to step in and say, Ben, you had some of that wrong?
Our time, I just went back and looked at the dates on our files. So we submitted the deadline in early fall, received notification just before NCA, and then we got the funds at the beginning of the next calendar year. So it was like January of the next year. There was a delay in our institutional things, not NCA, getting access to those funds. So, and then they checked in with us, I think about a year later, which is where we sort of talked about our progress on the project and presented at the next subsequent NCA on our preliminary results.
Very good. Well, we have 5 more minutes left on our schedule. And so this is my last call for questions. Do you have to have an institution to apply for the NCA grants? You do not. You can apply as an independent scholar, provided that you are a member of NCA. So it is a NCA member benefit.
But I do want to thank, I'm so sorry. I do want to thank and just say it's a strategic choice to fund first-time grant award winners. And part of that is because winning a grant begets winning more grants. When people see you've been funded by other organizations, then they're more likely to fund your work. And so NCA is breaking that model to say we're trying to give funds to people who've never received grant funders to try to set your career on an important trajectory where you could continue to fund more socially conscious work. So I do want to thank NCA for thinking of that and sort of disrupting that norm as opposed to following the fold of only giving money to people who already have earned money, if that makes sense, through their research. So I appreciate that too. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were asking a question, I think.
I was gonna ask, like, so if you do not have an institution affiliated, like, how would you carry out the research and disseminate the results without IRB? I'm a junior scholar, so I was like IRB, US IRB, so like, do you have any tips or advice or insights about that? Because I do have some independent scholars who do not have affiliation, so I think that might be helpful for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's not a scenario that I have seen on my end yet. And so I would just imagine coordinating with NCA along the way and saying like, okay, this is the circumstance. What do you need from me? And just working hand in hand with the national office, and primarily Dane Clausen is the person at NCA that administers this. And so I would think just working pretty closely with him. And it looked like, Fawad, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank NCA for this opportunity. It really helped me get other grants and and it just helped me build a profile where I could apply for other grants. It was just really helpful. And my project would not have been possible without NCA's support. So I just want to thank NCA for this opportunity. And I would encourage everyone to apply. It's a wonderful experience.
I just have one last question, if I may.
Please.
Thank you, Benjamin. So my question is that, so if we are on a project and we're looking for a grant, but we need a bigger grant, but because right now, looking at the current situation, if we would start, a stepping stone, so will this be the right grant to even apply for and then start at least the project and then look for the bigger grants in the future?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we have in mind.
Thank you.
And I will say so I wasn't there when the Research Cultivation Grant was developed, but it is recent enough that I know, who developed it and why and what the motivation was. And there are definitely two key problems that this is designed to solve. One of them is my research program is very fundable by big agencies, but I haven't been funded yet and they don't want to be first. And NCA is like, we would love to be first. Let us get you started. Let us help you build that record. The other is people whose research the big agencies aren't in the habit of funding. And they may be very far along in a very successful career, but thinking, how come I can't get funding for my research? And NCA wants to step in and say, we think your research is fundable, even if this federal agency hasn't, stepped up yet. And so we're always balancing, this is an early career person who has very fundable research. This is a great investment versus this is somebody who's obviously been, ignored by funding agencies and their work is outstanding. And we really see the value of it and want to invest in it. So you may find yourself in any or both of those circumstances. I want to thank our outstanding presenters today. I would like to imagine just the cacophonous standing ovation. On Zoom, everybody's muted, but it's deafening. I can hear it from my home office. So thank you all for taking time this morning. Thank you all for attending it. And I want to echo thank you to NCA, which is all of us, for valuing and supporting programs like this.